your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Hello, I'm Naveen Day. Thanks for joining us for a look back at Alberta this week. CBC News did some backpedaling this week. The Crown Corporation is retracting a story alleging someone in Alberta Premier Daniel Smith's office emailed Crown prosecutors questioning the handling of cases in relation to the pandemic protests near the Coutts border crossing. CBC made the announcement on Wednesday, amending their story from January 19th. An unsigned editor's note atop of the amended online story reads, "Our sources have insisted that Crown prosecutors felt political pressure regarding the Coutts cases, but they were not able to confirm that the emails they originally described were sent directly from the Premier's office to the Crown. As such, we have updated the story, removing references to direct contact between the Premier's office and prosecutors." CBC News regrets reporting direct contact by email. Premier Daniel Smith took to Twitter, where she said she felt vindicated. In her tweet, she also said, "Now that the CBC has expressed regret for its inaccurate reporting and Albertans know the truth, I consider the matter with the CBC closed. Additionally, I'm asking the Alberta NDP to acknowledge their error and also retract and apologize for spreading this misinformation." A violent tornado left a trail of destruction behind through a rural area near Didsbury in central Alberta last weekend. Emergency officials say the twister was around 2 kilometers wide and traveled around 30 kilometers an hour. Fortunately, there were no injuries, but livestock were killed, including at least 10 cattle. Police say 14 homes were impacted by the tornado, of which 5 were completely destroyed. Heavy farm equipment was tossed around like toys, and the winds were so powerful that they stripped metal from many buildings. Locals also say the storm brought hail the size of golf and tennis balls. Saturday's extreme weather follows multiple days of hot temperatures and unsettled conditions for southern Alberta. Heat and storm warnings were issued for a number of areas of the province over the weekend. A 19-year-old bull rider died following a weekend Indian Finals rodeo event which took place on the Stoney Nakoda First Nation. Organizers say Seth Salto, who was from Maskwacis, was following in his grandfather Marcel's footsteps as a bull rider. He qualified for the INFR main event in Las Vegas a few times and had his sights set on joining the professional bull rider circuit. Those dreams and aspirations sadly ended on Saturday in what proved to be his final ride. Family members say after he was injured, he was taken away by ambulance, but died en route to the hospital. Firefighters battled a massive blaze at Lake Louise on Monday afternoon. Fire officials say one of the biggest accommodation buildings caught fire. Emergency officials say the Skiing Louise-owned Charleston residence, which houses between 150 to 200 staff in the summer months, was completely destroyed. Officials say fortunately everyone made it out of the burning building safely, but the building is a total loss. One person was injured and taken to hospital. Police have taken one person into custody, and the investigation into the blaze continues. On Tuesday, RCMP charged 40-year-old Timothy Alexander Peterson with arson with disregard for human life and possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose. The Alberta government announced $175 million in funding to help communities devastated by wildfires in our province. Officials say wildfires in May and June burned more than 1.4 million hectares and resulted in 38,000 Albertans having to evacuate their homes. As part of the disaster recovery program, officials say local authorities affected by the wildfires can now apply for costs incurred responding to the blazes and repairing related damage.
The community expenses eligible for financial assistance under this program include the covering of volunteer firefighter compensation, overtime costs for salaried firefighters and municipal staff, reception center costs, structural protection costs, any infrastructure that was damaged as part of the wildfire response, and response costs for Government of Alberta ministries working to manage the impacts of wildfire and protect communities. I want to be clear that the disaster recovery program does not cover costs of damage and loss from wildfire itself or costs incurred by forestry and parks in fighting the wildfires. Only costs incurred by responding to the wildfires and repairing related damage.
The disaster recovery program in Alberta provides financial assistance for uninsurable loss and damage caused by emergencies and disasters. The Calgary Stampede kicked things off Friday for the greatest outdoor show on Earth. Parade marshal was Canadian Space Agency astronaut Colonel Jeremy Hansen. The Stampede runs until July 16th. When we return, what is Alberta to do with its multi-billion-dollar surplus? That's next. You know, it appears the business of politics knows no end, and the quest for power and opportunity to govern could seem to be a never-ending story. Earlier this week, Hal Roberts spoke with our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, about Alberta's budget surplus and the cooperation we are seeing among the Western premiers. Here is part of that interview.
Our province's new finance minister, Nate Horner, says, things are shaping up. The province has been able to pay down around, $13 billion in debt and even put aside a little money for the Heritage Savings Trust Fund.
And I think it's actually more than a little. I think it's something like a tenfold increase, assuming I had my numbers right when I looked at it the other day. What I was watching for on this fiscal update is whether or not it would actually be looking good. Because back in the budget in March, I guess it would have been, the province was sort of banking on a barrel of oil going for about $79 US. That was the average that they expected for 2023, and they based their calculations on spending on the royalty revenues from oil at that price. And it actually hasn't been quite that high. It's been more like US $75 a barrel. And then on the day of the fiscal update, it was below $70 a barrel. So you put those numbers together and you say, oh gosh, well, is the province actually looking at a shortfall in terms of royalty revenue that's expected for its spending? So that's actually the big question right now, and it's a bit of an open question actually, because the finance minister Nate Horner, who took over from Travis Taves, who didn't run in the last election, he didn't answer the questions about it. He said, look, we're going to wait until the end of the fiscal year, which is, I believe, at the end of August, to sort of deal with the consequences of that, or to at least talk publicly about it.
Premier Daniel Smith met with the other Western premiers in Whistler, BC recently. Tyler, they talked about a lot of things, but most importantly, it appears as though all of the premiers were in agreement with Premier Daniel Smith when it comes to resource development.
Yeah, so they all sort of got together, the premiers of BC, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and the Yukon, just to sort of, talk out Western priorities. And one of the things that did come up was that Western resource development can't be sort of crushed, I guess, is maybe too strong of a way to put it, but can't be sort of damaged by the federal government's environmental priorities. And of course, this isn't just Alberta's oil and gas industry. This is British Columbia's gas industry, British Columbia's logging industry. You've got mining in Saskatchewan. You've got mining up north. So it's a slightly broader range of industries, perhaps, than Albertans are used to thinking about in this context. But, you do have agreement from the Western premiers that there needs to be a focus on economic development and maintenance in addition to the climate. So, it was interesting because it was a fairly a fairly calm and collected sort of communique statement that the premiers put out. It didn't have any of the sort of fire spitting that Albertans are maybe accustomed to seeing from their premiers and that people in Saskatchewan are accustomed to seeing as well. So you could argue that it was a bit of a different tone for Smith, but of course she was part of a group of people issuing a statement, not just her. So hard to say exactly what that means for her attitude towards the federal government going forward.
Preston Manning has been heading up a panel looking into the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, Tyler, and making recommendations for any changes that might improve things if we ever go through another pandemic. Now, the interim report was due on June the 30th. What do we know at this point about its findings?
Well, nothing. And part of the reason why we know nothing is that the government isn't releasing the interim report. So the final report is due, I believe, November 15th, but it's November at any rate. And they've said that they're not going to be releasing it prior to that date. And so this actually is the practice they've used in the past on some of their other panel consultations and reports. But it would be sort of nice to know what Preston Manning has found.
Yeah.
Of course, his appointment was fairly controversial. The NDP said that he had no expertise in the matter, and that he was had ideological views that were going to sort of predetermine the outcome of his inquiry. And so actually we have no way to judge that at this point either. So not only do we not know what the recommendations are, we don't know whether or not the government's confidence in him and the opposition's lack of confidence in him, if either of those were validated, neither or both of them potentially.
The province recently announced $175 million to help communities recovering from the wildfires. We've seen so many of them so far this summer and in the spring, Tyler. Now, can you explain in detail what the $175 million will be going towards?
Right. So, there's all sorts of costs that come with a wildfire. There's overtime for municipal staff that are working on evacuations. There's firefighter wages. There's the actual costs of evacuations if a municipality, has to charter boats or planes or buses or something like that. So the cost will go to things like that municipalities had to shoulder, and they will also go towards some sort of rebuilding and infrastructure costs.
After the break, the importance of Alberta's place in Confederation. Many believe being part of Canada is like living in a sea of possibilities. But are some of those possibilities limited in Alberta and other Western provinces? Earlier this week, I sat down with Josh Andrus of Project Confederation to talk about what leads to that feeling of Western alienation. Have a look. Now, thinking of the recent Sustainable Jobs Bill, or Just Transition as it was previously called, do you see any steps that the current Canadian government is taking to address the concerns and grievances of Albertans regarding the province's role in the national economy?
To put it bluntly, no. I mean, this has been an issue since the federal Liberals were elected in 2015. They brought in a tanker ban, immediately banning all exports of oil effectively off the coast of northern BC. They've brought in the Impact Assessment Act, otherwise known as the No More Pipelines Law, which is actually more encompassing than that. It effectively gives the Liberals final veto power on major projects, not just on energy, but it could be a gravel pit in Stettler. This is being challenged in the Supreme Court by the Alberta government, with 8 other provinces intervening on Alberta's behalf. The federal government has zero support from the provinces on this. The Sustainable Jobs Act is just another step in the direction of completely dismantling Western Canada's energy sector. There aren't policies coming in to limit the number of cars on Ontario freeways. There aren't policies coming in to limit the ability of some of these, like a Quebec Concrete company, from polluting the St. Lawrence. They're bringing in legislation that's directly targeting Alberta and Saskatchewan, and I think it's specifically because we don't vote Liberal. The Sustainable Jobs Plan there was a leaked memo from a Blacklock's reporter obtained it from the internal government memo that said Alberta will lose 187,000 jobs if the federal government moves forward with the Sustainable Jobs Act. They've now renamed what was called the Just Transition. They can't even use the terminology because of the negative connotations that comes with economic development in even a developed country as Canada, where we bring in a policy that's effectively going to drive costs up. Not only are they bringing in these policies designed to attack our industries, they've also extended the equalization formula for an additional 5 years in a recent Ways and Means motion. It was a 400-page document. The equalization renewal was 198 pages in. It was barely noticed. It's one of those things where we're happy to contribute to the development of the rest of the country, but we need to be free to do it. And if we're not free to do it, then why are we helping? I think that's really the basis of the frustration here. So no, the federal government does not care. We had a referendum in Alberta to eliminate equalization from the Constitution, eliminate the principle of it from the Constitution. It was supposed to trigger some kind of a negotiation. Not only has the federal government ignored it, they have actually extended the formula for an additional 5 years without consultation from the provinces. Finance Minister Nate Horner was on record saying that this is unacceptable. So this is something that is going to be an overarching issue through the summer as we head into the legislative session in the fall. It's going to be very interesting to see how fast the Liberals move on the Sustainable Jobs Act, especially given the pushback from primarily Alberta and Saskatchewan.
Now, you mentioned equalization as well as the Sustainable Jobs Bill, and a lot of oil and gas revenues pay for a lot of needs that Canadians have. So, in your opinion, do you think that there's a plan or idea of how Canada can make up the revenue shortfall if Canadian oil and gas sector was deleted?
No, I think this is poorly thought out. I think this is going to lead to job losses across the country. I mean, the energy industry, you have to remember, is the industry that powers every other industry. Without affordable energy, we can't have economic development. We actually could see the economy move backwards. Energy, because of its influence in price mechanisms. I mean, every product that you use uses energy when it's being produced, when it's being built, when it's being transported, and then when it's on the shelf at your grocery store or the store it's purchased at needs electricity to run. So by increasing energy costs across the economy, it's going to increase prices. And if you see that combined with increasing unemployment, it's going to lead to a deep recession across the country. I don't think this is well thought out. I think this is absolutely terrible policy coming out of the federal government, but it's nothing new. We've seen this before. It's been going on for the past 7-8 years here since the Liberals were elected. So it's going to be something that we're keeping an eye on for sure. Right now, Alberta's economy is the strongest in the country. Our immigration is the strongest it's been since 1914. We've seen the population grow. So we're in a unique position where we currently are doing okay, but to see the federal government plan on bringing in policies that, according to internal government memos, are going to phase out 187,000 jobs. That's going to have a devastating impact across this province, and I think it's going to enhance an already simmering cauldron of Western alienation.
When we return, we hear about one man's career-ending quest to rescue children and restore their families. You don't want to miss this story of hope and freedom. Keep it right here. You know, one issue that many shy away from discussing is the sacrificing and trafficking of children. In this next interview, we hear from a former U.S. Homeland Security agent who quit his job to rescue children abducted from their homes and forced into sex slavery. His experience was the inspiration for the movie The Sound of Freedom, which outperformed box office expectations this week, even surpassing the latest Indiana Jones movie. Here's part of our conversation with Tim Ballard.
Tim, can you give us an idea of how big an industry child sex trafficking is?
It's enormous and shockingly enormous. It's about a $32 billion a year business. That's the transaction money. If you talk about how much money traffickers, pedophiles make on the backs of children, that's upwards of $150 billion a year. It's the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. The United States, though we like to pretend it's happening far, far away, we generally are the number one demand, the highest consumers of child exploitation material. And we have the border policies that are facilitating the trafficking of children right into our country. One of the most frustrating things during my 12-year career as a federal agent was I couldn't tell people. The few people around me that I could mention it to, they didn't want to believe me. They thought that child exploitation meant 17-year-olds. And how can you, because a decent mind can't comprehend that a 7-year-old or a 5-year-old could be sexually abused and raped. You can't conceptualize it, and so you don't talk about it.
There's a line in the movie where Jim Caviezel, playing your character, he's asked about the number of perpetrators he's caught, and then he's asked, well, how many children have you rescued? Could you describe that moment in your life where everything changed?
Absolutely. All I did, and that's what the film depicts there at the time, was get the end users. And it was satisfying, but it was always haunting. Like, I'd see the videos, like, where's the kid? Can't we find the kid? We didn't have the tools and capability at the time to do much in that area. And it was at that time that I started thinking outside the box. How do we get the kids? And as the movie will show, I end up seeing for the first time. And they filmed this scene, by the way, exactly in the place at the southern border where I was working. Wow. I spent 10 years on the southern border, and it was the first time I saw a child that I had seen being sexually abused in a video. And the American trafficker was taking this little boy, this Hispanic child, kidnapping, trafficking, and making child porn videos out of the material. And he was arrested at the border, and I was the agent that was called in and began this investigation. At this time, he told me about his sister. He told me about other people, other kids, and that began this journey that's depicted in the rest of the film, Sound of Freedom. So it was that moment. It was that moment when I saw that child, and then he kind of put an exclamation point on it when he gave me this little necklace. The necklace he gave me was like a rosary to him. His sister had given it to him, and he's giving it to me. And I tried to give it back to him. He says, "No, this is yours." And I didn't know. I don't know what he was. He's 5 years old. I don't know what if some angel was whispering in his ear or something. But later on, I discovered my name was on the necklace because there was a scripture on the back that was 1 Timothy 6:11. And so all of a sudden, it becomes this symbol from God to me. The filmmakers, I told them they probably should not put this scene in the film because no one's going to believe it. They're going to think you made it up. And they said, no, we're going to put it in. It's true. And it is true.
Can you describe maybe a moment, a God-ordained moment perhaps, where it seemed like everything was lost, but then God just came through and brought in some rescue or changed the circumstances?
I mean, I could tell you so many stories of that, but I'll briefly tell you one that just happened last year when the war in Ukraine broke out. My wife felt just so inspired. It was pure revelation, I think. And she said, go to Ukraine, go to Ukraine. And I said, there's no sense in that. There's nothing I can do there. But she felt so strong. We went and we ended up working with one of our partners at Aerial Recovery. And we rescued thousands of kids, identified a human trafficking ring out of Holland that was taking kids and trying to sell them into Mexico, Ecuador. It's insane. There's a 4-part miniseries coming out by the end of this year. But that's all. I mean, every step of that was, we blew through 6 countries, 3 continents, rescued hundreds of kids, thousands of preventative rescues in 4 months. And it's because God told my wife to send me to Ukraine, and we ended up rescuing kids in Ecuador. So that's how God works. And without that piece, nothing would work.
To watch the full-length versions of those last 3 interviews, head on over to our website, bridgecitynews.ca. After the break, the Alberta NDP's finance critic wants to know the province's future plan with a Made in Alberta pension plan. Welcome back. Alberta NDP finance critic Shannon Phillips wants Premier Daniel Smith and the UCP to, quote, come clean about their goal of potentially pulling our province out of the Canada Pension Plan. Phillips says she is hoping for transparency from Smith and the province moving forward.
The Premier should just come out right now and say yes or no. It's time to end the speculation. That is also bad for the CPP and their ability to plan and make investment decisions for the $500 billion of assets they have under management around the world. Staying in the CPP, we can contribute to the strength and stability of all of the province's pension system. This isn't Ottawa's pension system. The CPP is a creature of the provinces.
Bridge City News reached out to the office of the Finance Minister Nate Horner for comment on the story and received a statement which in part reads, the Premier has been very clear. No one is taking away Alberta's pensions. We are waiting for the final report from LifeWorks, formerly known as Morneau Chappelle. Once that report is final and our government has an opportunity to review it, we will release it to the public. If Albertans make it clear that they would want to have a referendum on establishing an Alberta pension plan, we will do so. Beginning this fall, curling will become a full-time sport at the University of Lethbridge. Casey Scheidegger has been announced as the new head coach for the men's and women's pronghorn curling programs. Scheidegger comes to the U of L with a lot of experience. She has several Grand Slam titles under her belt, including the Canadian Open Championship, the Players' Championship, and the Tour Challenge. She has also participated in multiple Scotties Tournament of Hearts events representing Alberta. If you've ever taken a drive out of Lethbridge, you'd know that the Highway 3 corridor stretches all the way from southern Alberta into British Columbia. Destination Canada has chosen this long patch of highway as part of its Tourism Corridor Strategy program. It is called the Sustainable Journey from Prairies to Pacific. Aaron Crane, the CEO of Tourism Lethbridge, says this initiative is key in developing the future of tourism in our region.
Looking at, mid-sized cities and things that are maybe off the regular path, this is where the opportunity sits here within Canada. And it's nice to see that, the federal government is recognizing that and, looking at, promoting those things that really make Canada special, and agriculture and, the Rocky Mountains that we've got, over it heading west into BC through Crow's Nest Pass. All of those are unique to our area and really special, and that's going to make us stand out. And it's nice that they see that as well.
The other two corridors chosen by Destination Canada are the Atlantic Canada UNESCO Tourism Corridor and the Northern Indigenous Tourism Lodge Network through the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Northern BC. It's not every day that you get the opportunity to view an important piece of World War II history. The folks from the commemorative Air Force Air Base Arizona made the trek up to Lethbridge to showcase a B-17 bomber that saw action during the war. A second B-25 aircraft also made its way to our city on Thursday, and there will be a chance for air enthusiasts to take a ride. BCN's Micah Quinn caught up with the staff from the group to chat about the B-17 bomber and the Flying Legends of Victory tour.
The B-17 bomber Sentimental Journey is ready to take flight this upcoming weekend. Michael Shepard, the ground operations coordinator with CAF Air Base Arizona, told us the aircraft was built in 1944.
It was produced for the most part by ladies. Rosie the Riveter built this airplane as well as other airplane during that period of time. It has about 500,000 rivets that hold it together, and those were all put in one at a time by Rosie. There were 12,731 of these airplanes built, and this is one of about 3 in the world that are still flying. The average age of these young men was about 21 years old.
After the Second World War was over, the bomber stayed in storage in Japan for 8 years. Following the war, it came back to North America, making its way to Chico, California.
And it turned into a water bomber, so it put out forest fires. In 1977, one of our members purchased it and donated it to our organization, and we've had it ever since.
We also took a quick tour of the inside of the B-17 bomber.
It could be 40 to 50 degrees below zero inside of the cabin there. There is no insulation. In fact, in the back part of the airplane, there's not even seats to sit in. The guys had to sit on the floor.
For more information on the event, you can visit the Air Base Arizona website. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
What does healthy living mean? Well, it means making positive choices that enhance your personal health. When we return from the break, we discuss how the food you eat is vital to your health.